Friday. It is time to get back into the swing of it. Our next speaker is a freelance motion designer and art director based in Melbourne. Over the last 14 years, he's created animation for pretty much every format, from GIFs for phone wallpapers to feature-length documentaries that have played in the UK Parliament. He's usually found lurking in Slack channels, giving out advice, cat gifs, and terrible jokes. Please get your hands out and bang them together for Jason Poley.
Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you everyone for putting on today. It's been amazing so far. Is that going to play now? All right. Hi, I'm Jason, as he said, all of those things, so it's a little bit redundant me doing it again. So I'm just going to play you my reel, as is the law at this kind of event. We don't have time for that. Settle down. So what I want to talk to you about, I want to talk about this idea I've been developing on my own in the last couple of years or so, which is about being a creative person as well as being a creative professional, and about how separating these two sides of my creative identity as a working artist, that's a word, has helped me move towards a more mentally healthy and sustainable career. So this is going to be heaps of fun. After all the light-hearted talks, so get ready. I promise there'll be gifts. So what do I mean by creative professional? I mean, I'd like to be that guy. But I mean, just running a business and being a functioning part of like the industry. So if you're freelance, I'm talking about all that time and effort you spend into managing bookings. And if you do own your own gear, being your own IT department, running your own accounts, all that kind of energy, as well as the time you take to keep up to date with tools, keep on top of the latest software releases, know the latest cool plugin that everyone wants you to know. Especially as a freelancer, it's unlikely anyone's going to pay you to do that. And just keeping a finger on the pulse of day-to-day kind of visual trends. Grains are cool now. Are long shadows ever going to come back? Is low poly ever going to be revived? I hope not. And it's really just about staying current and what you do to fit into the industry so you can keep getting work. And so the creative person side of you is, well, what do I mean? I mean, like, it's that kid who never put down the crown. It's that deep kind of need I hope most people in this room have, which is to create and usually express yourselves visually. And why we put up, like, we get paid to express ourselves visually pretty much every day, and it's why we put up with this industry. And I want to use this duality to frame some experiences I've had over the last 3 years. And I'll be honest, this reflection has been brought on by some mental health issues. So I want to give a disclaimer that I will be talking honestly about some mental health stuff. So let's roll back to 2016. I felt a lot like this cat. I had just burnt and bounced out of full-time work after a 3-year stretch. And I was kind of let out of work unexpectedly just before Christmas. So I didn't have much cash because I got to buy presents for a small child. And so I grabbed 2 GPUs because I couldn't afford to build a whole new PC. And I picked up some new toys. And we're going to make the sponsors happy for a second here. So I've always liked playing with particles ever since I got my hands on Particular in After Effects. And I'd been using thinking particles in my last full-time job, but thinking particles isn't the most straightforward and fun system to use. And every time you go on the internet looking for tutorials on how to do stuff, everyone's like, no, use X particles, stop that. And also they expect you to take a node called PStorm seriously, which I'm not going to do. So the overarching goal here as well was to actively start steering my career now that I was freelance again, and to show these new 3D skills I've been learning, and because you have to display that you can do the work you want people to pay you for, I did what any self-respecting motion designer did, and I took to Instagram. Now, because I've been feeling incredibly burnt out, these small experiments definitely felt more achievable than, say, taking on a long-term project, and was also an excellent way of delving into X particles. I just threw together a couple of things I'd learned that day, figured out how to render it in cycles, and then threw it straight up on Instagram. And that was a nice way to kind of start feeding that creative person side of me, as well as really moving that creative professional in the direction I wanted to be going. So I'm going to take a slight detour now, and I'm going to give you a couple of random X particles tips that are going to be based more around like working in simulations when you're on client money in a professional environment. So the first one is about scaling your emissions. So, I mean, by starting with a small particle count so you can work quickly. The beauty of doing this inside cinema is that with a small enough particle count where you can still see the definition of the shape, cinema will constantly play back on a shortish loop, so you can start throwing in modifiers, you can start tweaking things as you want and getting fairly quick feedback and be able to iterate through ideas fast. And then when you've got a more or less kind of something that might be cool happening, you can then start upping your particle count, just add a couple of zeros onto the back of the emitter. And this is the point where you want to start fine-tuning. This won't probably run real time. You're probably looking at a couple of minutes caching, but that's still quick enough to start working through fine-tuning. And it's a good point to start sharing with whoever your art director or creative director is, because this will give them a better idea of where you're heading, and you can get that feedback early when you can still change it quickly. And obviously the end goal being is you put enough particles in until your laptop cries. So just as an example for like how fast this would take to iterate through, that first one was real time. The second one was taking 3 minutes on a laptop, and that last one took 30 minutes on a laptop. And when you're on someone else's dollar, you can't really be afforded to spending 30 minutes of time every time they want to tweak one value until you're right at the end. So you need to know like when to scale back. And I want to quickly talk about building complexity. So this is the turbulence modifier with the default curl noise. It's fairly recognizable. It looks cool, but everyone kind of knows what it is. And so by layering up modifiers, you can start to get something more interesting. All I've done here is taken two of the same modifier, scaled the noise up to 300%, and then dropped the noise on the second one down to 50%. So you get the large swooshy movement, and then you get a more interesting kind of breaking up of those large movements, creating kind of contrasted detail as well. And the end goal with X particles, much like After Effects, is you get the most interesting result if you layer up as many different things as you can and tweak them. So this has got a rotator and a flow field in as well. And this just allows you a finer level of control. If you have 4 modifiers doing different things in a simulation, it means you can easily respond to feedback. And just lastly, I want to quickly talk about data mapping, because it's not as scary as it sounds. It's easy to show than tell. So here's just simply the particles get slower over age. So you can see the little graph in the bottom, and that just, you can see the speed gets lower as the particle ages. It's quite straightforward. And it allows you, again, this is all about levels of control, and you can start layering them up. So the second one has a scale modifier, and you can see the wiggly graph I've drawn. You can get as weird or as interesting as you want with these. Excuse me. And then obviously the end goal here is to be building more procedural but controllable simulations. This one's based on the particle radius is set at random by the emitter, and then that determines how much they're being affected by the speed modifier and the turbulent modifier. So the big heavy objects are moving through the scene slowly and aren't getting buffeted about by the pretend wind, and whereas the smaller ones are behaving in a much more natural manner, and they're zipping around as you'd kind of hope for. And using the data mapping is often more efficient and better than using, say, the fall-offs and fields inside cinema, because you're not quite as tied to physical objects in the scene. And again, it's just about giving yourself control. So for anyone who's interested, there are all the scene files on this Dropbox link. So did this focus on a Creative Pro payoff? In the short term, yes. I only started doing 3D work. I was getting booked to do more particle work, and I ended up doing more art directing than I'd done before. There were problems. This was all happening during the daily render craze, which I think we've all pulled back on as a community and chilled out a bit with the daily rendering. But the pressure to be posting on the reg was definitely there for me. Ultimately, no one gives a shit, so it's very important you remember that. And also, there was no creative depth to anything I was creating. So initially, I started feeding that creative person side of me, but towards the end, it was just stretching and it's just empty techniques going up on screen, and that isn't ultimately that satisfying. But we got to 2018 and everything was going well. I was getting industry recognition. I was forming good relationships with studios around the country who I'd been wanting to work with for ages. And I was doing what the most you can ask for, which is getting challenging work that I enjoyed. So that's the end, right? 15 minutes, yeah, Jimmy? Except I really wasn't okay. Everyone has coping mechanisms, and being British, I learned very early on to put all your frustrations in a box, tape the box up, put it in a safe, lock the safe, and throw it in the back of your brain and don't ever look at it again. And then I was up in Sydney in August 2018, and the box broke and it opened, and I was sat in a cafe utterly overwhelmed and... Excuse me. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I swear it wasn't the Sydney coffee. The coffee was quite good. There you go. So I'm not going to depress you totally. So because I had a friend who used to work for Beyond Blue, I knew to go to Beyond Blue, and they have this excellent questionnaire which you can do if you're in a crisis, and it asks you a series of questions about how you're feeling and how you have been feeling, and that act helps ground you, and it offers some advice about what avenues you should lead for, and lets you know how severe it actually is what you're going through. And so it told me to go see a GP that afternoon. I was like, I can't. I've got to go and catch up with some people off the internet, and then I got to go to an award show. So I did that instead. But I just want to pause and say, why am I talking about this? It's mostly because I want to talk about my experiences, just in case anyone else ever comes across this or is going through this. And I only know to reach out to these places because I had friends in my life who were kind enough to share with me their experiences. Otherwise, I would have been utterly lost. So, and I'm not special, and I'm not alone, despite feeling incredibly alone at times. So I just want to talk about how the depression kind of manifested for me, which was the intense, sad bits you kind of expect, I guess. Didn't really expect how intense they were going to be, much like being Batman these days. Also, there was a lot of anger, a lot of bottled up frustration, a lot of grumpiness towards just small things that were happening in my professional and personal life, and just like an inability to kind of look at them and deal with them in the moment. But one of the most powerfully, one of the things that took me by surprise the most, I think, was the feeling of disconnection. I have a lovely little family, got a cat, a kid, and a wife, and I would sit at the dinner table and feel like a stranger. I couldn't reach out to my friends. I didn't know how to start conversations about what was going on, and I could feel myself drifting away from everything that I really cared about. So now what? There'll be fun gifts soon, I promise. So admitting you need therapy is hard. This wasn't meant to happen to me. I'm always thought of myself as the reliable one, the one you get in to fix a problem, the one you come to with your problems professionally, like someone who doesn't throw the toys out the pram or have anything close to a breakdown. But it happened. And so that is a hard step, but going in and seeing a GP and walking through that door to get a mental health plan, you're just met with support and empathy. And it's very easy to, once you've opened that door, they make it very easy and they just want to be there to support you. And so you go to the GP, you get your mental health plan, and then you get given a therapist. Well, you get recommended a therapist. They're not just like off a peg. And you have to do work. You have to go in with an open heart and an open mind, and you have to engage in that process. And it isn't easy, but it's worthwhile. And therapists are people that you can't disappoint. You can't let them down. They'll always just be there to support you no matter what you do because they have that professional distance. So I'm just going to quickly touch on some of the factors that kind of on reflection led me here. I'd been working remote in my home office after coming freelance for 3 years, and I'd been steadily decreasing the amount of time I was spending cycling or exercising. I was not seeing friends as much as I used to. There's the industry factors, so all those like freelancer pressures that we all deal with. So that's why I want to say I'm not special. I know everyone in this room is dealing with the industry factors. But I also had a couple of other, that year wasn't, whilst being good, wasn't great for having clients push jobs back a week at a time for almost a month. And a lot of that was down to me not really communicating properly as well. I'm not going to take all the blame, but some of it. And just trying to meet industry expectations. So trying to keep up with all the software that I thought the industry wanted me to know, and keep up with the quality of work that I was seeing put out daily by people who have actually just been slaving away for 3 months on it, but I thought they did it in a week. That's kind of that Instagram constant feed searching can be a bit corrosive. And obviously there's personal factors. This is no one big thing that caused me to break. It was sadness by 1,000 cuts, I guess. I'm just going to touch on them quickly. We're not going to get too deep, don't worry. Like having kids is hard, and it's not always sunshines and rainbows. And I had a lot of expectations about what I was meant to be feeling and how I was meant to be, and how I wasn't living up to my internal expectations. And also just having grown up in the UK in the 80s and 90s, there's just like, you're not allowed to have emotions unless a soccer game's on. So that kind of toxic masculinity really does kind of corrode into you after a while. It all really led up to this being in the back of my head constantly. And while it's good to have goals and keep pushing yourself forward as an artist, it's got to be for the right reasons. You can't do it because you think you're shit. You do it because you want to get better and you enjoy the craft. And yeah, sorry. So during the therapy sessions, because I'm not great with the wordles, I started describing these more intense, quite pure emotional periods as these visuals, and they started forming into almost like little vignettes in my brain. And so because of the way I'm wired now, I was like, well, can I make this into an animation? Because that's how I have to communicate, I guess. And so I started building up this short film and started seeing if I could, in fact, communicate how I was feeling at these moments. And one of the early stumbling blocks I found, and one of the reasons why I haven't made a short film like for the 10 years beforehand, is that I am guilty of constantly focusing on the technical side. And if I post something, I want people to go, I don't know how he did that. Whereas I should have been focusing on the message and, no, that's cool. I don't care how he did it. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of this is all very clever post-rationalization, because we've all studied media studies. We all know how to bullshit ourselves out of a client meeting. But a lot of this was going in the back of my brain. And one of the key processes when I was doing this, because when I was making this short film, I was in the middle of this depression and I was having to revisit some very intense things. And I don't know if that was the greatest idea I've ever had, but I trusted in my process. I trusted in, that's kind of the anchor that kept me going, was having sketches and working through animatics and getting strong bones down before I was then able to move on to the sweets, the candy, the lighting, the techniques, getting the particles moving, all that kind of stuff. So I ended up with this. I just want to have a quick note about, it took me about a week to decide to put that subtitle in with my depression. and I was going back and forward on it. I was very wary about releasing this film at all because honestly, I didn't know how it'd go down with the industry, and I was genuinely concerned everyone would stop calling, especially as a freelancer. But I also realized that I have no right to try and talk for anyone else's experience, and I need to be honest and own up that this was my experience. So that's how you get to my depression, which it seems like a small thing now, but it was like a week-long debate with myself. So I just want to give a massive shout out to Justin, who came in the last month and redid the music for me when I decided I did want to release it, because I can't release it with expensive trademark music. That's not fair. And he did an amazing job, and he's a lovely person. And so if you do need music, after you've talked to Nick's fella, give Justin a call as well. He comes in with a lot of emotional kind of openness. He's great. So after releasing it, it did a little well. I expected like just kind of the local community, a couple of thousand views, like most of my other work goes. I know this isn't YouTube numbers, Ben. I'm sorry, mate. But and again, all those worries about not getting hired afterwards. But then it got a staff pick, and that was a very happy 30 seconds. And then the 5 minutes afterwards, I realized that a lot of people might just find out I got depression. And a lot of people have. That was last Wednesday's number. That's too many people. So I went and had a little happy, sad cry in the toilet. So let's talk about what I did to, like, there's no fixing it, but there are ways of managing things. So in my career, to come back to the creative professional side of things, I moved office. I moved out of my home office and I rent a shared space with some lovely architects and a graphic designer down in Brunswick, which is the best side of Melbourne. And what that's allowed me to do is I now cycle in 2-3 times a week. I'm in a suburb where I have friends, so if I want to go out for a coffee with people, I can. I'm just reconnecting back with the human race feels quite nice. I'm also, there's this thing that we talked about in therapy, which is acceptance. And it's not about letting people walk over you, but it's about not holding on to that anger when you are getting screwed over by a client, or you get notes that maybe you didn't really want and are going to take twice as long as the client thinks to feed back on. The most important part of this is that you can't control other people, and that is incredibly annoying, but you can control how you react to them. And it is just about like not holding on to anger, expecting it to burn someone else. And black and white thinking feeds into this as well. It's the idea of thinking in shoulds and shouldn't haves, and applying maybe internal standards you have for other people onto them, and when they don't live up to them, you have to remember it's because you didn't tell them you had those internal standards for them. And to the last thing about trying to keep up with the industry and try to feel good enough is that I just stopped learning what I thought I should be learning from an outside point of view. And I started learning things just because they took my interest, and not putting too much pressure on myself to be able to take them into production in the next 3 weeks is something important. I've realized that it's taken me a good part of a decade to get good at cinema and After Effects, and I can't expect to pick up another package in 3 days. That's just silly. So as a creative person, the main thing has been making time to actually start creating for myself. And one of the main things I did, if any of you are unfortunate enough to follow me on Instagram, is that I've been out with a camera a hell of a lot more than I have in the past. And it turns out I have a real passion for going out and taking shots like this one. And it just allows me to reground and refocus. And just, I'll be honest, like this kind of the last past year, getting back into photography has really kind of dragged me through this stuff. And just making sure I make time for personal projects that are just for me. And one of the key things about making personal projects is that you don't owe anyone anything from them. You don't have to do them to be cool. You don't have to do them to show them how smart you are. You just do them because you need to, and then you'll get to a far more interesting place. And the upside of all of this, noodling around, is that they all will inevitably end up feeding back into your professional life, and you will be a better creative professional, hopefully. And we're just going to talk a little bit on just some tips I have for kind of managing stuff and having a slightly healthier outlook. Have some good buddies. have 2 to 3 people in your phone who you can text or call at any time, and you can go to the pub with and have a conversation that goes deeper than how cool the latest Marvel film was. And it isn't just about pop culture or whatever nonsense. Have someone you can talk about relationship problems. Have some friends you can talk about issues with work. Ideally, have them outside of the industry, because it's a whole lot easier to bitch about you people when you're not there. And this is also part of taking responsibility for your own mental health. In the same way is that you don't eat chocolate every day, like for 3 meals a day, as much as that would be fun, is you got to look after your mental health constantly too. And by having these friends, you're not going to be placing all this responsibility. If you do have a romantic partner at home, it's quite easy to expect them to be the person who takes all of this load off you. And that's incredibly unfair on them, because you're not allowing them any time to give you back. And so by having a network of friends you can talk to, you're going to share that pain and each other's pain, and you're going to be able to lift each other up. And then recharging is also incredibly important. I've learned now that if I freelance for between 4 and 6 weeks straight, I'm taking a week off. I can't keep doing it. I'm in my 30s, I'm not 22. You need to recharge and spend that time however you want. As a freelancer, I enjoy having that time where I'm not beholden to anyone and not having to constantly check that I'm doing enough work and being responsible. If you're full-time, I understand that's harder. I hope studio owners do understand the value in taking teams out for like day trips to an art gallery or something, and just allowing time for internal projects after a massive deadline, because the idea there being, if you don't smash your full-time staff, they won't keep moving on and turning over as much, and you'll have a happier, friendlier environment. And I'd also urge you to have a clear mental health policy for all your staff, where they don't have to come to you and ask, they can just find it and read it, and to treat mental health the same way you would treat any other illness or sickness. And the last one's most important. Cats are amazing because they don't care about you. Dogs are way too needy. So yeah, just to wrap up quickly, looking after your mental health is a learning process, and there's no winning at it and there's no getting it right. There's just moving forward a day at a time. And just make sure you're not living your creative life to make yourself better for the industry, because there's another 100,000 youngsters coming up, and the industry will just burn you out and throw you away. So do something for the love of the craft, and do it because you care, and do it so you try and say something. And if I did bring up anything you'd like to talk about with a mental health professional, please reach out to your local GP as a first step, or go to any of these links. They'll be able to give you advice and next steps. And if you are struggling at any point, just remember, I think the world's better with you in it. Thank you very much.
Well done, Jason. You got there. Public speaking isn't easy for anyone, and I'm guessing it may have been your first time.
Yep.
And, this is Jason's first time, and then to be brave enough to talk about these sort of issues. I think we're all lucky to work in this fabulous industry, but we're not saving lives. There's more important things going on than moving pixels around. And it's great for Jason to touch on these issues that maybe we don't talk about enough. So another round of applause for Jason. Well done, mate. Really good.